Right, hello everybody. I'm here today with James Foster, who is our lettings director, and we're going to be talking about the Renters' Rights Bill, or the Renters' Bill, or the Renters' Writing Bill, whatever they keep calling it. But I think its current incarnation is the Renters' Bill. Is that right?
The Rented Rights Bill.
The Rented.
I think that's what we're at the
I
moment.
don't know. It feels like they've changed the name of that 5 times since.
It could be so much simpler. Much simpler.
I'm not so keen on the word like the rights, like it seems like really kind of powerful, the word rights, isn't it? But the Renters' Bill would probably be a good thing. So.
Yeah.
But anyway.
It's a little touch aggressive. Yeah.
It'll probably become the lettings document or something by the time it gets there.
Who knows? Who knows? It's anyone's guess at the moment.
Yes. So, as I say, we're here with James, and we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the various kind of new clauses, bits and bobs that come in, and some of the nuances as well, because there's a lot of talk around like Section 21 and abolishment, but there's actually loads of other little bits in here which are quite important, and also some of your experience about people, maybe even tenants or landlords, contacting us as a business, with their kind of concerns and questions about all of this new legislation. So,
yeah.
I suppose we'll start with the biggie, Section 21 notices, abolishment of that. I mean, that must have landlords. That's probably arguably not in favour for landlords, really.
Not at all. Not at all. It is frightening. It is frightening. And I think the thing is, with a lot of things in the lettings world, everything is looked on by landlords using means and methods in an incorrect manner, which is not my experience in over 12 years of the industry. I think the Section 21 notice works really, really well, as is. I appreciate probably some people abuse that out there, but it's going to get a lot harder. And the thing is, when there's a real issue or a real problem, we're going to have other means by the Section 8 notice, but the enforcement of that is the bit I think that is worrying and concerning everybody out there.
So with the Section 8 and things, so at the moment, obviously talk to me like I'm like a 5-year-old, but at the moment you've got no fault eviction, you've got rent arrears, you've got probably like they're using it as some sort of drug den in misappropriate use. There's probably various different clauses. But it strikes me that some of those clauses are easy for tenants to kind of get out or void the notice. For example, like the rent arrears thing, you have to be in whatever it is, 8 weeks worth of arrears. Then if you just pay a little bit, then you're not in 8 weeks, and then the notice is void. So.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think actually where the Section 8 notice is good is that to counteract them tenants that manipulate the situation for their own benefit, there is another grounds which is consistently late paying rent. So they kind of back each other up. I think what's great about the Section 8 notice is that there's a variation of grounds for you to then go for, obtaining the property back. But where you've got the Section 21 notice where people just go, the Section 8 notice, that doesn't always happen. And if it doesn't happen and you have to take it to court and there's no Section 21 notice anymore, then them courts are going to be really backed up with all different cases. I've only ever had to use a Section 8 notice twice, thankfully, and I've done Section 21s probably less than 30 times in a 12 plus year period. So,
but I guess that's kind of, even though it's a small number for you, it's quite disproportionate, is it? A couple of times versus 30, so it's obviously an easier tool for you to use.
Section 21 is definitely easier. It's definitely easier for a landlord, it's easier for a letting agent. We've even had tenants ask for us to issue them with a Section 21 notice because it gives them an opportunity of taking a different means when looking for new accommodation. But generally the rule of thumb is if you get served a Section 21 notice, most people look for a property and move on as promptly as possible, generally within that 2-month period. a Section 8 notice is a bit of the unknown, and not everybody understands it, and if in doubt, people are always told to stay put, and that's what they do. They stay put.
So, just thinking a scenario which is a real life scenario which you will be familiar with, no names mentioned. So you get rid of Section 21, that's gone, so you can't give a kind of no fault eviction. So you've got this tenant who has missed a month's rent or maybe 2 months' rent or whatever, but they're always paying on time anyway, and they've paid regularly up to that point, but they're making no effort to make any inroads into that previous debt. Traditionally, you would think about maybe serving a Section 21 notice. That might even prompt them to address the debt, or at least you then got the tenant out. You can take the money from the deposit, perhaps, and then move on to another tenant. But you wouldn't be able to do that really under where would you go with that? So say you've got that tenant that's like they've missed a month's rent, and then you now can't serve the Section 21 notice, but it's not enough for a Section 8 notice. There's no that's
the problem. That's the real problem, and that's the issue that we're going to have to try and overcome somewhere along the line, where you've got a tenant who is missed a month's rent, but are always consistently paying the rents after that on time and in full. They fall in that crack between 2 months in arrears, and you could almost, I suppose, you can almost say that they are consistently paying late, because every time they pay their rent, that covers the previous month's rent, so they are effectively always paying late. But I think if that one was to go to be adjudicated on, it would get thrown out. That's my feeling.
I guess would they, at that point, they would sort of say the tenant, like if you went for adjudication, they may force the tenant to address the fact that there is arrears.
You would hope so. Yeah, that would be the hope, because with a situation like that, you kind of need all parties working together to resolve. But if you've got one of the parties not willing to resolve, or not being proactive in any form of communications, then it becomes a really tricky situation, and you would hope and expect that a judge would call on that and say, get yourself set up with a payment plan, which is the most sensible thing. And that would be the thing I think that most people would agree on. But
Okay, because I guess it will put some people off being a landlord. Essentially, if you're quite a small landlord, perhaps definitely if you've bought the property in your own name, and you might be a high rate taxpayer now, or even if you didn't own the property, so you might be actually making a loss or very small amount of profit out of the property, which I don't think even landlords are not that educated on. Sometimes you have to kind of do the mathematical equation and go, look, you got this, you can't claim the mortgage payments anymore because it's in your own name, and actually you're paying 40% tax on the profit, which is on the higher amount. A lot of people don't really understand that calculation, but when they do, I think that they then look at it and go, do you know what, then the tenant misses a month's worth of rent, this is hardly worth it anymore.
Yeah, I think there's the misconception that all landlords are super rich and have got thousands of properties and are just there to make loads of money from poor tenants. That's not the case. You get different variations of landlords. You get two households merging into one, and so therefore they rent the second home. You get some people that parent has passed away and they've inherited their property and they decide to rent it out, and situations like that, or the property's being rented out to pay somebody's care facilities. So there's a lot of landlords who do rely on that income month on month and in full, which if these situations persist moving forwards under this new bill, then it's going to probably have a lot of people looking to withdraw from the industry.
Because it is hard if you put yourself in the shoes of a tenant. They'll probably look and go, well, you bought this property 10 years ago, there's equity in it, you may not be making money right now. So it's kind of this assumption, as you say, that the landlord's like reeling it in. They're probably not reeling it in as much as you think they are from a monthly profit and loss point of view. Maybe there's equity in the property that has gone up. So I think there's that misconception for people,
Yeah.
but what it will do is it will drive a lot of people out, and if a lot of landlords leave the market, that void has to be filled somehow, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and there's also the misconception that all tenants are, bad people, because they're not. There's actually a huge amount of people that look after the properties that they rent, stay in properties that they rent and pay the rent on time and in full each and every time. So, there's misconceptions on both parts of things, but there is that real worry, as you say, that if landlords withdraw from the industry, then what and who is going to fill the void? And I don't think that the current plans of just building houses en masse randomly in the southeast is going to overcome
Well,
these
it's a
issues.
supply and demand thing, isn't it? So if you've got lots of landlords who are going, I can't really make any money out of this, I might as well just put my money into pensions or something like that, which traditionally for a lot of mum and pop landlords where they only own one or two, that was their pension. Then you've got less stock, so then supply and demand comes along and you go, well, at any rental property there are more people vying for it, so the price will end up going up.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we saw during the COVID periods and coming out of the COVID period, is the inquiries per properties were in excess of 300 at times, which was the contributing factor to the 40% increase in rents in the local area. So seeing properties rise as high as they have, it will only continue to do that. There's less properties available, and unfortunately people won't necessarily be able to afford the rents that they find themselves in and on, and that's going to be more stress and more pressure for the council and local government.
And I suppose that kind of segues quite nicely to the sort of ban on bidding wars or increasing the rent. There's going to be a kind of a rent cap thing or something coming in, isn't it?
It's what I've read up on, and everything is subject to change, because that's kind of what's happening at the
Changed
moment.
the name 5 times.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's as it goes through the current stage of reading over the papers and discussing them. What I've read and understood as it is at the moment, rent increases will still be a thing. They will be increased. It will still be an annual thing, and it will still be carried out by a Section 13 notice. What a tenant can do if they feel that their rent's being increased unfairly is basically go back and say, I think this is unfair, and it can go to the first tier tribunal if it can't be resolved between both parties. But bidding wars in the sense of rental properties is not the right way to go about things anyway, in the best interest. You should always, as an agent for your client, be looking for the best tenant, not the tenant necessarily paying the most amount of money, because somebody that comes in offering way more money than it's worth just to get ahead of the game could be the person that stops paying their rent partway through their tenancy. So it's a case of when a landlord's got, say for example, during them times where we were having so many inquiries per property, we were limiting how many viewings we did, and thankfully we were able to bulk the viewings together. So we were doing one viewing after another over a 2-hour period, 8 to 10 viewings in that time, and then from them 8 to 10 viewings, 9 times out of 10 you would have 8 people wanting to secure the property. And during that time, you would also have some people offer more. You put all the information to the landlords, for the landlord to read and see it clearly, and then they would pick the best one for them.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't necessarily always be the people bidding over everybody else. But it is probably a good thing.
Do you
all
think
round.
that it will drive up prices slowly? Like, an example that I think of quite often is a lot of business associates of mine, they might have 1 or 2 buy-to-let properties. They're kind of built a little portfolio, maybe 3 or 4 as much. But their tenants have been in them for a long time, they've paid the mortgages down, they've got fairly good equity in it and the rest of it. But they're say to their tenant, like, we're happy to keep the rent the same all the time, you're paying it and they've been good to us, and there's this like kind of hearty feel. Problem is if say the market rate's like £1,000 and the tenant's paying like 700, if they then can't increase it up to 1,000, say if they want to sell the property and then a valuer comes along and says, well actually this tenant's underpaying against market rate, it doesn't stack up figures wise anymore, they're going to have to deal with that, and they may not be able to deal with the 700 to the £1,000. So I know that's a small problem and a minority, but I think as a kind of cultural shift, it will probably be more likely that the landlord is going to be saying, I'll just put the rent up every year anyway, because then I don't fall behind with it, and I know I'm capped all the time. So possibly gone are the days of someone saying I get a really good discount because I've been here for a long time.
Yeah, I think it's a really fair point. I think from the perspective of maybe looking after the tenant, allowing them to pay below market rental value is not looking after them, because although they're probably seeing a bit more cash in their pocket, that landlord, anything could happen. They might have to sell the property through means that are not their fault. There could be reasons why they need the property back. And when them tenants go back out into the market after 7, 8, 9, 10 years of renting a low amount, they're going to be so out of sync with the current market that it's going to do them more damage and harm. So I think it's always worth a landlord increasing rents on an annual basis, whether they do that once a year, or whether they kind of do it every 2 years, but still do it to try and keep the property near enough in the market rate for the best needs of the tenant as well as the best interests of the landlord. It works both ways, because then if the tenant does look to move on or needs to move on, they're not so out of sync with the reality of the current market, which is something that we've seen for many, many years in them kind of scenarios.
Yeah, I strongly think that it'll be the end of those sort of arrangements really, because any landlord that is keeping an eye on their property will know that they can only put it up by so much, so they'll just do it automatically anyway. Even if they don't do it to the max, they'll do something. And then, of course, anybody that's leaving the market because of Section 24 legislation and all these complicated things, and they're selling up, the new people that might buy that property, if they are buy-to-let landlords rather than, say, like a homeowner buying it, they're going to be much more business-minded about it, because the kind of shift in the government is to get rid of or disencourage people using it as a pension fund. And almost, if you're going to do property, it's got to be a business, and then businesses act differently. They're not emotional like Fred and Susan, who might be renting to John and he's been there 20 years, we don't want to put up the rent. Businesses don't tend to be like that because it's a model, they've employed people and so on. So the shift, I think, will be away from all of that.
Yeah, the government definitely wants the tax from any profit for sure. That's what they're there for, and it's always a tricky one. We need landlords, very much so. But yeah, it needs to be done in a sustainable manner. You're right. It does need to be treated like a business. It does need a bit of emotion taken out of it. And it does need to be done properly rather than ad hoc or for a bit of fun.
Okay. And some other bits that kind of strike me as like things that people forget about with all this, because it's nice to all the headline stuff, is one of the things is the periodic tenancies. So like for me, for instance, we tend to just give a tenant a 12-month contract. We've always found that works for both parties. So they've got security, they know they've got a 12-month contract, they know that I can't put the rent up in that period of time, they know they've got the property, it's secure for them. But for me, it also means that I know that they can't leave, or if they do hand in their notice, it's not like, here's the keys back, here's a month, and then I'm gone, and then there's refurbishment, and it's a bunch of hassle. You can kind of plan your business model around that. So it's kind of benefits both. But the plan is to do away with them, or is it like you'd have 12 months, then you can't do another one, or how's that going to work?
No, so there's definitely room and scope in the industry to have both fixed term and periodic tenancies for sure, and they work in very different ways, and they work very well as they currently are set out. The plans put forward are to eradicate the fixed term periods completely. So you will be taking up a tenancy on a periodic basis right from day dot. It's a 2-month notice period for either landlord or tenant. Landlords are a little bit more complicated than that of a tenant. A tenant can just give 2 months notice and move on, as the way it's sort of set out at the moment. A landlord has to go through the rigmarole of finding grounds to recover the property. And what I would say is that I don't think that the periodic tenancies are going to work for either landlord or for tenant. I think it's something that when there is a fixed term, everybody feels secure. As you just said, you can build how you do things, you can plan your year ahead, you can budget, you can build your whole business model around your fixed term 12-month agreement or 6 months, depending on what your preference is. Have everything periodic is making people very, very nervous.
So yeah, I think the single, or the abolishment of the kind of fixed term tenancy will have some impact on landlords and tenants and the way they view things. But there are going to be some new enhanced protections for tenants that are over and above some of these things, aren't they? I don't know kind of exactly what that entails, because they keep chopping and changing their mind, but there's going to be some enhancements to their rights.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they're thinking just yet. I'm not sure they know what they're thinking just yet. I think a lot of things are going to be bolted on as it goes along. But ultimately, I think what they're trying to achieve is to give tenants the protection that they would have maybe got under the previous sort of council housing schemes or housing association schemes. I think they're looking at maybe trying to do something where they resolve their own issues by protecting the tenants to such a degree that it's difficult for the tenants to become a problem to the local councils moving forward.
So let's talk about some other rights as well, like the right to buy you've got with the council, but in the private sector. So if a tenant had been living somewhere for like 5 years or they contributed X% towards the rent, they had the right to ask the landlord to sell the property to them, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's one that's been mooted about for more years than I care to remember. How they can make that work, I'm not entirely sure.
I don't know if that really works. I don't have I'm a landlord, as you know.
Yeah.
I don't have an objection to it. I don't really think it's as long as it is short, really. I think obviously you've got a business model and that's making money, and then the tenant wants to do that. But therein lies the problem, that the government are basically shifting away from your like mum and pop landlords into more corporate or business type structures, and then that company might be making money and paying wages of staff in their own right. Like if I take myself for instance, we've got XYZ percentage of buy-to-let property. If say 10% of the portfolio activated their right to buy the properties, we'd generate a load of cash income because we'd be selling presumably at a profit. We bought it at this price, the years of growth have gone into it, so we will do all right out of it. But now we've just got this lump sum. I now need to figure out what to do with that lump sum. And it might be that at that moment in time, the market's not that great to buy. So I've still got wages to pay, then there might be redundancies. So it's kind of counterintuitive in my mind to be like, you're going to have this system that's going to allow the tenant to force the landlord to sell it, but we want you to act like a business. And then in no other circumstances of business would you be forced to sell an income generating asset under a piece of legislation.
You're really right there. I think for all the rights that come for the right to be able to purchase, you've also got to have a right for the landlord to be able to say no. It can't be, nobody's hand can be forced in any way, shape or form. It has to be a mutual agreement. It wouldn't work otherwise. You're right, the benefits for the government if the tenant had the right to buy, and then the landlords then decided to go out and reinvest into more property, would be an increase in taxes again, through stamp duty, land tax. So you're kind of trying to create a way of bringing an income into the government, which is not, once again, not sustainable. It's got to be, if the landlord is thinking of selling, they should be giving the tenant the first refusal on purchasing. That's the way to do it, not, Joe down the pub has had a great chat with his mate who knows a little bit about finance, and now he's going to go and buy his landlord's property that he's been renting for 18 months or however long they deem the period to be. It's got to be sustainable.
I think that's a good point, actually, because it would be, unlike the Section 24 legislation where you basically go, look, you're not running a business, so therefore you can't claim the finance cost. It would be quite hard for them to implement and go, you're not running a business, so a tenant can serve a right on you, whereas you are running a business, so therefore a tenant can't do that. I think that's harder to implement, not saying they couldn't do it. But actually, if the landlord wanted to sell, I think, like in the world of leasehold property, you have to be served Section 5 notice if the freeholder wants to sell the whole building, the freehold title of the block of flats. So they could have like a Section 5 notice, which you'd serve on the tenant and say, look, we're going to sell it, we've had an offer, this is the price. You can't offer it to anybody else lower than that price, but the tenant has the right to buy it at that price.
Yeah.
And then if you can't sell it at that price and you need to sell it for a cheaper price, you have to serve another notice, like the leasehold system. I think that would be quite a good thing to do as a compromise between
I fully agree. It's all got to be in the interest of fairness on both parts, and I think this is the problem with the industry. Landlords and tenants, they're separate entities. It should be fair on both sides of the coin. It should be a fair game, not heavily weighed in any one particular person's favour. And if it was a fair game, then I think the system would probably work better than maybe it currently does or previously has done.
So other things in the kind of, I suppose, I don't want to use the word spirit, but that's kind of what it is really, in the spirit of anti-landlord, or maybe making it harder for landlords or whatever. There's some other things that are coming into effect or proposed. So you've got the new decent home standard, you've also got the private rented ombudsman, so they'll be able to go there, and then also the private rented sector database. So they're all things that landlords will have to adhere to or be aware of or whatever going forward.
Yeah, and I think some of them are good. I think some of them are good. I think some of them are not quite as good as they could or should be. I think the decent home standard is a good thing. It's always good for landlords to provide a safe place for somebody to live, but only on the understanding that everything's a joint enterprise. If a tenant's living in a property, and this is one that we have all of the time, and the misconception on how it's worded or whose fault it is, it comes up each and every time. But condensation, we all suffer from it. All of our homes suffer from it unless you're living in a brand new home. A lot of properties weren't designed to have gas central heating and double glazed windows and be completely airtight. But with condensation and the mould that comes with it, it's often referred to as damp, which it isn't. And the thing is with condensation is it's not just a landlord's fault. It's sometimes not just a tenant's fault either. And with that, the decent home standard needs to recognise such things like that and make sure that it isn't unfairly weighted in one way
Yeah.
or the other. But I think the decent home standard is a good thing. I think having landlord's details put on a database for
Yeah.
everyone to see is not a good thing.
I suppose those things are like kind of interconnected, really, aren't they? Like those kind of three bits of legislation. But I guess question, like for me and probably some people in watching this video, is like who decides what's a decent home standard? I mean, is there going to be some sort of perimeter to it, or like an EPC, for instance? Someone comes out, assesses your house, they take measurements, they do stuff, they take photographs. Then that certificate lasts for say 10 years in the case of an EPC. Is that like kind of? Do you think that's sort of what they're proposing? They'll come out and they'll look at the home and they'll go like, without like, for instance, if there's nobody living in this property causing condensation because they're cooking without the pots on the lids and all that kind of stuff, and like showering or whatever, not ventilating properly. This property here, we've looked at it. It's got good carpets, good radiators. There's no mould that's just naturally forming, no damp issues. We're giving it a grade B, if you like, if you wanted to make a comparison to an EPC. There's your certificate, and then this database would have like, this landlord has like 25 properties ranging from a D to a B on it. I think like that sort of makes sense to me, but outside of that perimeter, I'm like, it's so open to like any sort of interpretation or who marks it. It's got to have some sort of system, right?
Yeah, I think you've hit on a really good idea. To be fair, if there was a
There's a
system,
whole industry. Hang on a minute, Hayley. New business idea.
if you had a system set up similar to that of an EPC for rating a home and how good it is and whether it meets the required specification, whatever that may be, I don't think the government has actually got a plan on how they're going to propose or manage this particular thing. I think, like a lot of things, there's going to be some black areas, some white areas, and then there's going to be a whole load of grey. And the governments and councils love a whole load of grey because it's so open to interpretation. It's the best way to make money because you can find people tenfold with it. I think, and I've always said this, I've said this for probably the last 10, 11 years, if all landlords were licensed and the government gave the landlords who were licensed something back in the form of tax relief or something to appeal to them for being landlords, and they did check the homes and they did make sure as part of the licensing process that everything met all the requirements out there, that's got to be the best option moving forward. So yours is, I'd say, probably slightly a better idea because you're comparing it to something that's already being done that is quite a simple thing in the form of an EPC, and taking it on that front and then merging that with the database, like we have an EPC database. You can have a Matcox registrar or whatever you want to call it. It's your idea, so we'll give you the credit. But and if you had that and people can then see you only rent out good properties, then I think that's got to be a better way than the proposal of putting a landlord's name and address and who's involved with them, who their agents are, and what the properties are, which makes a landlord more vulnerable because they're easily got at from people, by anybody.
Especially if they're a company as well, you know, you could have like your likes of a housing association or like a big private landlord, and they go like, we own these like 1,000 units, for instance. And even if you merge that with the EPC, you could be like, right, you can see all the properties that they own and the EPC level and then the good home standard. That kind of makes sense to me. And like having like a license or a registration for a business if they're doing property, because that's really easy. They can use the CIS code on the company's house, or if you're an individual doing it, then the license is in your individual name. And from our point of view, that puts still further more stuff to put people off, which from a business point of view is good because there's less people, so therefore the market's easier for us to deal with because there's less of people fighting over property or whatever, or dealing with it, more people selling up maybe, and then normally that drives up some sort of supply or demand as a historic thing. I know that's not always in the tenant's favour, but from a business point of view, but then there'll be extra admin that is associated with all of this, so some of those costs will be offset by that. And I know somebody who in the comments will probably say, you know, the admin involved in being a new registration of a landlord is probably nothing, but it is because you've got to keep an eye on it. You've got to make sure those EPCs and the rest of it, like much
the managing
more than
and maintaining it is labour intensive at times, more so than just
so
registering.
like your job's going to become more onerous, isn't it? I mean,
and we'll have to charge you more money for the pleasure of doing so.
Yeah, but I mean, you're mostly dealing with singular buy-to-let landlords, aren't you? There aren't that
predominantly.
I don't know. You've probably a better idea than me, but the portfolio is probably about 85% of it is singular landlords. If you take that, like you got one landlord might own a load of property, or one that owns like say 20. Take them out of it. The rest of the people are
they've got one or two at most, and that's quite common. But for every property generally that you have, you're only going to have one landlord. So therefore you've got 50, 60, 70 properties, and you've got 50, 60, 70 landlords. Everybody needs something doing for them. Everything is equally as urgent as the next person. And that's what makes it a labour intensive admin task. And that's why we'll have to charge more money, and landlords will have to pay more money.
Do you think that, I mean, they'll probably put the rents up to counteract that, that's the big problem. But do you think that you'll see, I mean, you must see it already anyway, but people, when their tenant moves out and they've only got one, and they go, I'm going to try and sell it. I mean, we've had a few of those.
I had one so far. That's all we've had so far. But that doesn't mean that there isn't more teetering on the edge, just waiting for the tenant to go, or just waiting for a change in anything to happen.
It'll be the mortgage rates, I think, for a lot of people, because you're talking 5 years ago we're in the pandemic, so anybody that had a new mortgage that was like between 2020 and say end 21, so that 2 year period, if they're 5 years down the line is like anywhere between 2025 and 2027, or the end of 26, so between now and like 18 months time from now, almost everybody will be off whatever product they were on, so everybody's gone from a mega low rate to a higher rate, so there's that coming at some point as well.
Doubling in rate is a killer for landlords, because as we said earlier, there's actually, in some cases, landlords aren't making hardly any money off their, once they've paid everything they need to pay out each month, associated costs with the property, there's not a huge amount in the kitty, and then once the mortgage rate doubles, if best case scenario doubles, that's going to take a huge dent.
So, leading on from all of this, what do you think that landlords and letting agents and tenants and stuff, what's your kind of advice to them, or what do you think they can do in readiness for this? Because it hasn't come into effect yet, it's pending very soon, isn't it? Like, they'll probably give a date for it in a month's time, any moment now.
I think we're looking at, I think it's fair and reasonable to say we're looking at around the end of October, if anything, coming through and coming into force. How well that does, normally in the past, anything that's come into play is generally started from 6th of April. That's just been the way it's been. Whether this will be that case or not, I don't know. But I think, knowing what we've kind of seen and understood from the government as is, we're best to keep a watching brief at the moment, but definitely look at what your expenditure is and look at trying to cut the fat off of that where possible.
This is for landlord and for tenant in terms of preparation.
I think so. I think on both parts, because if there becomes a burst of landlords selling up, then for tenants they're going to want to be in the best financial position to go and secure something new, and the likeliness is they're going to be paying more money than they're paying currently. Also for landlords, they want to keep it so they are making some money, so if they do keep their property, the cost or the admin burden's going to cover. They've covered themselves to make it a viable option, and I think that's probably the best advice to both sides is look after your pennies and trim any fat.
What about your fellow letting agent chums in the industry? Got any advice for anybody out there at all?
Well,
Because obviously that's going to affect everybody,
we've
isn't it?
we've been and seen many different changes over the
Bans on
years.
fees.
Yeah, we're pretty weather worn in different changes. I think that there are going to be agents out there that are going to be looking to sell up because they don't want to go through another storm, and I think it's like anything. Everyone kind of needs to stick together. But if anyone is looking at selling up, don't go down the corporate line. Don't go down the corporate line.
You know where to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't go down the corporate line because all that's going to do is adversely affect the industry. We need independent agents out there to keep things fair and more honest and give a better service. So.
Yeah, and they'll be able to fine tune things and react quickly as well, isn't it? So I mean, obviously, as you touched on briefly, we do acquisitions here. So hopefully there will be some people looking to exit the market and dispose of. But I think in terms of any business advice, really, just as a general thing, is really to make sure that you kind of got your T's crossed and your I's dotted, so to speak, and you're ready for what's coming around the corner, because if you can do that, then you stay ahead of the game, really.
Absolutely.
You have to keep evolving with these things, and you're right in the sense that weathering the storm and these legislation changes, I mean, in the world of block management, the fire regulations have changed more times than I can throw a hat at since I've been involved in it in the last 20 years. The only thing that ever seems to never change is the commercial world. The 1956 Act is still the same Act that it was in 1956 right now.
They're very safe. Nobody really understands what they do in commercial, and that's why they're safe. But there's less.
I think because it's business, there's this assumption that you don't
people.
Need the protection of being more domestic, if you like. So
there's less. There's less people that are going to get hurt.
Yeah, I would argue differently, because I think a lot of business owners, they do it for passion rather than actually being a business owner. Like, they don't set out necessarily to be a business owner, so there should probably be some revisions to it or whatever.
Definitely.
And also, if you're providing a service to the local community, you might be a little coffee shop or something like that, those things need protection. Just because you're being profitable doesn't mean the landlord has a right to just whack up the rent based on that basis. So.
No, definitely.
But that's been really great. I do think there's a lot of changes coming, and people need to be prepared for it and the rest of it. But it's nothing that you can't turn your hand to. Yeah,
absolutely. I think we can't panic at this stage. We just need to wait it out, play the long game, and see what's going to come.
It would be interesting to have another podcast with you, maybe October time, see where they're at, and we have some of these things a bit more tightened up. We hope so. And then we can perhaps touch on some of the things that have been dropped from this policy, or some of the things that have been kind of fine-tuned or whatever. So that would be a good recap. So,
absolutely.
Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you.
As always, I know you're always busy. We like to keep you busy and all that.
Absolutely.
But thanks for your time.
Cheers. Thank you.